Well, hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Tonight we're going to be getting prepped to rebuild that 201 that we've been working on. Got all my parts in, and so we're going to go through those, make sure we got everything that we need, and then get the block that's sitting over there behind me, get it over here on the bench, and get that thing ready to go back together. So let me flip my camera around and I'll show you what we've got. All right, so here's my parts that came in. We've got 4-cylinder kits from Reliance. We've got our rod bearings, which are 10 thousandths over. We've got our main bearings, which are also 10 thousandths over. And then over here we've got our full gasket kit. It's got everything that we need in there. It's also got the flat gasket to go around the plate on the side, because this is a WD engine. And then we'll have pan gaskets, the F gaskets, oil seals, pretty much everything we need. There's the felt seals. And then I've got other miscellaneous pieces in here. Actually duplicated a few items. I wasn't sure if they were going to be in the kit or not. So another oil filter housing gasket. We got new shim kits for both rod and mains. Water pump. Thermostat housing. Distributor. Then I went ahead and got the gasket that goes over top of the hand clutch. I got another let's see, oh, that's that flat gasket for the plate. Got another one of those, so we got double that. Pilot bearing. Went ahead and got another oil pan plug, because the one I had was rounded off, kind of rough. I still got to get the copper seal. I think I've got one that will fit on the shelf. New head bolts. And I've got my standard cam bearings in here. I got those three, and those will be one of the first things that we do to that engine whenever we start reassembling. I think I cut, nope, still got some more down here. Manifold bolts. Went ahead and got a new radiator cap and the thermostat. So probably about $800 worth of parts, roughly. Got them here and ready to go. So we've got the head has completely been gone through at this point. I know you saw one of the other videos where I was working on the valve, so that has been completed. The block, of course, has been cleaned up and painted. We've got our rear main seal, the felt, so I'll be getting that out. I've heard one trick, guys will take those and put them in a vise and then just walk away for a while and then pull it out of the vise, and it'll drop in, and then it'll just eventually just kind of start swelling back up and filling in that that cavity. So we'll do that. Also, the cork around the the cork around the oil pan. I already had another oil pan gasket over here. Nice little tip is to go ahead and put that in something that will help form it. So when I get ready for that, all I got to do is just pull that out, and it'll already be kind of formed to my pan. It'll make it a little bit easier for me to install it. So I've got these are some gaskets that I had left over from another kit years ago that I still had. So like I said, I'll have some duplicates. which is fine. So it's nice to have a couple of gaskets on hand if you may need them for something. But anyway, that's what we got for right now. I guess the next step is I'm gonna go get the block and get the cherry picker, get that lifted up, set it over here on the bench, and then we'll go ahead and get that back oil seal on. Once that is on, then I can actually go ahead and mount it up to the engine stand, and then we can really get to work at that point. Once it's on the engine stand, we can go ahead and actually, yeah, I will. I'll go ahead and put cam bearings in it while it's on the bench, because that backside, if you recall in that last video, I had to leave one of the brackets off down there on the engine stand in order to get that bearing out. So instead of driving it, you know, all the way through without the engine stand on there, if it's sitting right here on the bench, and I'm putting this seal in right above that's where that cam is, so I can go ahead and put the outer cam bearing in it on both sides and the center. So yeah, we'll go ahead and do that as well. Then we'll mount it up to the engine stand and then flip it over and get everything lubed up, get our crank bearings and main bearings in there, get the crank set in, and yeah, we'll be moving forward pretty quick then. So anyway, that's kind of the introduction here to what we're going to be doing. We'll flip over to the time-lapse camera and let it kind of capture everything. I'm not going to do a step-by-step on this. I'll stop it at certain points and interject some details and torques and things like that, maybe some tips, and then we'll just watch this engine go back together. All right, get over to the block, get it picked up and set over here on the bench. I'm checking out some specs there in my manual. Started working on that cam bearing, and then I decided to go ahead and get that lower bottom main seal put in. Go ahead and drive in my new cam bearing there on the back side, and then I'll clean the top side of the block and get it prepped up for the sleeves to go in, and getting all that lubed up on the inside. And here's the first sleeve going in, and we'll go into detail now. Alright guys, so you've been watching on the time lapse. I put that first sleeve in, and I'm going to go ahead and just show you what I was doing over here in live action versus the time lapse. So this is a Reliance power part, and it's a cylinder kit, so it's going to have your rings, your piston, your sleeve, and then your O-rings for your sleeve. There's a little bit of information on there about it. I've got it vacuum sealed in this nice bag that's got, you know, it's oiled inside, so you don't have to worry about any kind of rust. It keeps the shelf life. So I'm just going to cut this open. Slide my whole sleeve. I'm going to put it right back on the bag here. There's my piston. So I'm going to flip this over. I'm going to go ahead and get my piston out, because I got to put the rod on it anyway. I'm not quite ready for the rod. I'm just wanting to get my sleeves in. So there's my piston. Rings and everything are on there. I'm just going to slide that back inside my box. Now on my sleeve, I've got to put my O-rings on. You can see your grooves right here. It's important on the block that you prep the block also. So I've gone through and took my wire brush and just made sure that, I just used my drill. Made sure there's no foreign objects or dirt or debris on the bottom side of that sleeve where it's going to mate up with the block. Once I got that done, I went ahead and put some Lucas assembly lube around that same area, and that's just going to help these O-rings slide in place and not be damaged. So I've got, you can see on my gloves, I've got extra oils and stuff on there from just getting the piston out. So I kind of coat the O-ring with that, and then we're just going to slide it in place. So everything looks good. Everything's in the groove. So at this point, we're ready to go ahead and put it in the block. So we'll flip over there, you can see that. Like I said, I've already laid everything up in here. Just want to slide my sleeve down in there. All right, so right now, the O-ring, you can see down in there, you can see the bottom. The O-ring's right to the top, so we obviously, you know, we've got to drive that down. So I'm going to watch that as I tap on it. And you just want to use a soft-faced mallet. And I'm just going to go around this thing. So we got that one installed. I believe the book said you can have 2/1000ths of an inch above the surface of your block. These are, I mean, you can feel it with your fingertip. It's just barely above the surface. I may try to get a measurement on it just to make sure that we're fine, but I don't foresee it being a problem. One important thing too is where your sleeves are going to go down here in the block, make sure you use a pick or something and clean out that surface. If there's gunk or anything in there, it could hold your sleeve up past the face of your block too much. So those sleeves are made for that block. They'll fit it, but there's still some tolerances in there. So with it not being new, then you have opportunities for, you know, anything to get in there to hold your sleeve up. So I also went through my boxes and I labeled them. This is piston 4, 3, 2, and 1, and that's as they're going in the block. Here's your flywheel on the back, and then this is 4, 3, 2, 1. So I know that in my box 4 over there, I've got the piston that came in this sleeve. So I want to keep all of that stuff matched up. Likewise, when I go to put on the push or the connecting rods, I've got them over there on the table, and I've got them labeled as well. So I want to make sure that that connecting rod goes to the right piston. It doesn't matter so much because I've got new pistons, but it matters at the crank side. So you want to keep all of that stuff in order as you're putting new parts back in that block. So I'll flop back to the time lapse. We're going to go through the process for the next 2 sleeves, and then once I get done with that, I'm going to flip that over. We're going to go ahead and install our lifters, and we'll go ahead and slide the cam in. Once the cam's in place, I can go ahead at that point and put in the crank. And the crank, I'll go ahead and get it torqued up, make sure everything is within spec using plastic gauge, and then we'll get that thing pretty much ready for the pistons to go. There'll be a little bit of work involved on each of my pistons, so I'll have to get the rods off the old pistons over there and get them connected up to the wrist pin. So a little bit of work. We'll flop over here to the time lapse, and you can watch all that stuff happen. And if there's a certain part during the process I feel like there's something that should be passed on information wise, and I'll cut over into a video piece, and that way I can get that spelled out to you guys. Stand by. All right, so the remaining 3 sleeves are installed, and I'll flip it over and I'll go ahead and put in those lifters in. All right, so you've been watching on the time lapse as I put in the lifters, and I just wanted to give a little pointer on that. Main thing with engine building is make sure that you put lube on everything. So I'm using this Lucas oil assembly lube, and those lifters, I lubed them up good. Of course, this is a WD block, so I've got that side plate. So what I would do is those lifters come through, I'd have my hand on this side, and I'd push that lifter back up in there, and I would rotate it as well. And I'd rotate it just left and right to make sure that everything is nice and free all the way down through there, and then lubed up my cam bearings. So at this point, we're ready to take that cam and slide it in here. It's going to come in obviously from the front side, so we'll just slide it right in place. And so what I'm going to do, I'll get my camera set up here a little better angle, and then you can watch that cam be installed. Okay, so over here to the side, I've got my cam, and I have lubed it up with the Lucas. And I went ahead and did the cam lobes as well, and I'm going to spread that around on each of those. That way she should just slide right into place as we go. It's going to make this thing slick to handle. You just got to be careful with it. All right, here we go. Alright, starting in all three of the bearings at the same time here. There it goes. Okay, so that's pretty much it. We got our gear right here. It's going to line up with our oil pump. It'll be one of the last things to go on here. I'm just making sure everything's spinning freely. Again, all of the lifters are pushed all the way down, so you shouldn't be hitting any of the lifters. Once the push rods are in place, those will be forced down at that point to ride on the cam lobe. So yeah, that feels good. Everything looks fine, lined up where it needs to be. Okay. All right, so next step is we're going to go ahead and put the set the crank in there. I've already replaced the rear main seal. Got that on there, so we'll set that crank in place. Then I want to go ahead and get those mains torqued down, and we'll use our plastic gauge to make sure on our clearances. We've got a bunch of shims, new shims over here that we'll have to use. So let's slide over to that. All right, so we got our main bearing set. The front is where your thrust washer goes, and there's a little indentation right here. And up here on the front of your engine, you've got there's a little dowel pin sticking out. So make sure you get that lined up correctly. Just make sure that your oil galleries and everything are lined up. There's that little notch that gets you in the right place, so you can't really mess it up. But I'm going to go ahead and lube this up. All right, so we're going to set the crank in here very carefully. And up here on the front, we have to make sure that we get the crank in time with the cam. So you got your two marks. Got my mark on my cam here, and then my crank ends up being up on this side. So got to rotate it. Got to pick it back up and rotate it around there to get it in place. Should have looked at that before I set it in here, actually. So there's my mark. All right, so we got those two lined up. See right here, crank and the cam. Might not be visible from that angle. Here we go. Crank and cam. Marks are lined up. So, should be in pretty good shape there. All right, so what I want to do next is go ahead and get my main caps put on. We're going to torque them with plastic gauge, and then see what our clearances are, and then we'll add or remove shims as needed. So let me get set up for that. All right, so I've been working the last few minutes on getting the rear oil seal cleaned up. I forgot about it. It's built into the cap. So in the middle of that too, don't forget to put in your F-neck gaskets right here. So there's the felt sticking up. You do not cut it off either. You let it stick up. And went ahead and put my F gasket on there. I put a little bit of sealer underneath it just to hold it in place, some Permatex, and did that on both sides. So then that way whenever you put your cap on, you'll have a nice tight oil seal right there with the pan. I've got my cap bolts cleaned up. They're going to torque up at 85 foot-pounds. I brought the main caps over here and I've got them prepped. I've got my bearings. I cleaned them up, got my bearings installed. I've got new shims. I've highlighted a few things here in the book on what I need to do. And so basically once we tighten down the caps at 85 foot-pounds, we'll take them off, we'll measure our plastic gauge, and we should have between 2 and 3 thousandths of an inch. And that will give adequate oiling to the bearing and still allow everything to spin freely. So that's what we're going to be doing here in just a minute. I still got to get my seal. This is where it goes in this groove. Still got to get my seal installed. I've got it over there in the vise, being smashed down right now. So if you just take them and you smash them down in the vise and let it sit there for a while, get everything ready to go, take that out, and then you should be able to slip it right into the cavity. You don't have to worry about fighting that thing. That can be kind of tricky. So anyway, that's where we're at this point. I will go ahead and get that ready, and then we'll flip back over when I go to put the caps on and get that torqued down. All right, guys, I've been tightening the main caps on this crank and getting the clearances set. Needs to be between 2 and 3 thousandths of an inch clearance in order to have enough oil to seep through there. So in order to do so, I took some plastic gauge, which you can get at your local O'Reilly's or AutoZone. And you put a little piece of that, which is laying right here. Put your cap on, set your shims, what you think you need to be, and then you torque it. And then you pull them off, and then you're going to use your gauge, and you're going to measure it. So when I measure mine, you can see right there I'm at 3 thousandths. So that's in my tolerance. That's what I need to be. So I go through there, and I do that on every one. So it takes some time. If you have to add some shims or whatever you've got going on, it's a lot of tightening, torquing, taking it back off and checking. But that's what you've got to do on each of those to get your clearance. And then to get that little piece out of there, I just took a little model knife here, and then you can just kind of get underneath that and it'll just roll back out of the way. So not really a whole lot to it. You just need to make sure you get all that off and get it cleaned up. So anyway, that's the process. The time lapse has kind of been showing me moving back and forth on there, so didn't get much details, just kind of turning wrenches. But anyway, so I've got the rear main and the front set, and then I just got the middle set. So once I get this one back in and tightened down, I'm just going to turn that crank over by hand, and it should spin fairly freely. I mean, there's going to be a little bit of resistance in there, but I want to make sure too, when I go to put this cap back on, that I'll put my Lucas oil back up in there. You can also see on the cap there's a little bit of that stuff left. I'll get it out of the way. And before I put it on there, I went ahead and cleaned that, wiped some of that oil off, so we had good contact with metal or crank to bearing. So anyway, that's that. We'll just continue working on this thing and getting the parts back in it. All right, so at this point we're getting the connecting rod off of the old piston and moved over to the new piston, and getting the connecting rod torqued up to the wrist pin. Went through and did each of those, and then we slid them into the block. Okay, so I'm getting the pistons and the connecting rods hooked up so that I can put them in the block. Looking at the manual, if you note, the connecting rod is towards the left-hand side on this piston. So I'm working on number 4 cylinder, which is the one that's closest to the clutch. And you note that the rod is to the left. So when I'm looking over here in the manual, here's number 4, and see A listed here. A is when you connect up that rod, you got to have it to the left hand side. It's going to center up whenever it goes into the block, and when that centers up, that's going to prevent that side from getting up against your new sleeve. So it's going to slide over. So I made it flush here. It's going to slide over to almost center. Get it back in there, about right there. And you look over here, we're right at the edge. So should be good to go there. The torque on those are 20 foot-pounds. And so I've got them torqued at 20 foot-pounds. And my impact drill pretty much is, I'm not sure what the value is, but when I tighten it up, it didn't move any once I put the torque wrench on it. So anyway, we got that situated. So I've got my block twisted and it's ready to go. So number 4 is on the back side towards the stand, and we'll just slide that in there. I'll put my ring compressor on, and we'll make sure that when I put it in, I'm going to do this. We know that that side is going to be towards the front, so when I turn this thing around, I don't get confused on what side's which. Also, your rings need to be twisted so you don't have your gap. And I haven't really looked at these because I just pulled them out from when they come out of that sleeve earlier. Looks like probably pretty good shape. None of those are at the same location. So that one's kind of close, we'll twist it a bit. So anyway, we'll do that, and then we'll just slide that thing in the sleeve, and then it'll push right back to my crank. One thing you may want to do is make sure that that piston connection to the crank is up or away from the sleeve. So I'm going to twist this and get this moved up here, and all that's going to do is just prevent me from, when I knock that thing in here in a minute, the connecting rod doesn't score up my my crank. So we'll rotate that around at each location. I guess what I could have done was done 2 and 3 because they're already there, but it's no big deal. Once I twist this, I'll do number 1 because it'll be up as well. It'll be up in here. Do number 1, and then we'll rotate it, and then we'll do 2 and 3. So let's get going. All right, so we got that first piston set on there, and use that piston ring compressor to compress the rings down and get that slid in. So went through and did that for all 4 of them. And then I just flipped it over and grabbed the connecting rod, pulled it up to the crank, and then went ahead and put that cap on there just to tighten everything down with my shims in place. And then I pulled the cap back off and put the plastic gauge in there, and then retorqued it to get my distance of clearance. It's real important when you use your plastic gauge to not rotate the crank. All right, so next we're going to be putting the distributor assembly back together. I won't really be able to set the distributor itself until I get that engine up on top dead center for number 1. Then I'll be able to set it. But for right now, we'll go ahead and kind of get things assembled and ready to go in the tractor. I've got to have the front half here in time before I can put my front cover on, which is what's keeping me from putting the pan gas or the pan on, and the oil pan gasket and all that. So with that said, we've got a couple new seals, just our gasket. We'll put a gasket here for those 2. Does not matter how this is, that'll just slide right in there, and then we'll be able to set the timing off of that gear, and of course the one on the bottom of the distributor. Then there's a little plate that will cover the front side there. On that plate will also be mounted, I think it probably goes this way, the bracket that holds the coil, so I don't want to forget that. And then got a gasket right here that will go behind that. This didn't really line up, so I just went ahead and made some marks on where I needed it. I'm going to use my knife and a pair of scissors, and we'll get that thing cut out. So we'll flop over to the time lapse. We'll throw this thing together. When I slide it in there, I got a timing mark somewhere on my gear. All right there it is. Got a little dimple in that gear, so we'll line that up with the one from the cam. So I slide over here to the cam, and it's right here. So I'll have to rotate that cam up and get it up in this area where that will slide in. So anyway, that's where we're at this point. We'll just keep moving forward. We'll get this thing assembled. We'll slide it on, and then we'll be ready for that front cover. All right, so putting the new gaskets on the distributor and getting that one on the back side cut out. Got that reassembled. All right, one thing I want to note before I close up the end here where the distributor comes out, make sure you grease up your gears. Just depending on what you have going on. I cleaned all mine out. It was pretty nasty, had some dirt and junk in there, so I cleaned all that out. Wanted to go ahead and grease up everything in there just to make sure that it stays lubed and we don't have any issues out of it. So that's really the only reason that we have a seal that goes on there. I had to cut those out, as you were seeing, to fit, but that's the only reason that's on there, is that's going to you know, as it turns, it's going to get warm and kind of maybe liquefy a little bit. Some of it's going to fall off. In fact, I probably want to cake it in there a little more than what I've got. Actually, I think I will. Just kind of fill that cavity up. Won't hurt a thing, and then it's in there. Of course, I'm going to have to pull the top side of the distributor off anyway to set the timing, so you can access it from that cavity as well right here once that's pulled out. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. All right, so I got the rest of the grease in there, got that sealed up, and the distributor is ready to reinstall. And then I realized I need to put on that side plate. So I went ahead and got my gasket in placed, got that installed, and then I got the front cover prepped up, new seal on that, got my gasket and everything ready for the front cover, and then I go ahead and install the front cover. So got that in place. Right before that, it's very important to go through and clean out all your threads with a tap just to make sure everything torques good. All right, so you've been watching for a while here. I got that front cover put on. I got the front cover seal, all that stuff installed. Got the distributor put on. It's not timed on the back side, it's timed up front. Side plate, and I got all the low end set to clearance and torqued up, oil pumps on. So this one, I think it'll be a good time to end part one of the engine assembly, and we'll slide over to part two, which will be the pan gasket, our head, push rods, rocker arms, all the remaining pieces. We'll worry about those in the second part two, and the crank, or the flywheel and pressure plate clutch and all that. So anyway, I hope I've taught you something, or at least helped out. Hit like and subscribe, leave a comment below, and stick around for part two.